Welcome. My name is Lori Perine. In today's presentation, I'm going to be taking you through 4 case studies that we do with a different archival collection. And this collection is the Legacy of Slavery collection that is housed at the Maryland State Archives. And so I'm going to be looking at this through the lens of how we can use trustworthiness as a way of implementing computational treatments with archival collections. And just a quick introduction to me. I've got some academic and technical things that are happening, but more importantly, I'm a whole human being. I'm all about the uke. So if you're in the Washington, D.C. area on a second Saturday, I run a monthly jam. Look me up, come and play with us. I also sing, and I'm a cat lady, although not childless. I am also a certified official for USA Swim. And so if you are in regional or national meets, you might see me on the deck. So let me start with a little bit of background in terms of what we're doing. What you've heard about so far is that we are operating in this transdisciplinary field of computational archival science. And I put this up for a reason, because you see a little green highlighted section. So in presentations that Richard may give, or Greg, or Rajesh, or Bill, or any of our colleagues may give, they'll talk about CAS, computational archival science, and from different perspectives. When I talk about it from the perspective that you see highlighted in the green there, which is that we're looking at the application of computational methods, including AI, but not exclusively AI, applying those in the domain of archival collections. But for me, I'm focusing on this frame of what are the socio-technical constructs and the human technology interactions that are important to the development of the technology and the application of the technology in those fields. Why socio-technical? In a prior life, not too long ago, I was a visiting researcher at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, an area fairly distant from the world of archives, but I was there exploring what it means to develop trustworthy AI and to develop risk management tools with respect to trustworthy AI, or risk management frameworks. And one of the things that became very, very apparent very quickly is that in order to have something that's trustworthy, you have to focus on people and the planet. So some of the, what you see here are some of the classical life cycles for artificial intelligence. And when you look at that, look on the left there, those classical life cycles focus only on technology workflows, right? And so what we want to do is to enhance those technology workflows and possibly change those by that focus on the socio-technical, on understanding those socio-technical techniques, the context of the application, and also engaging with an expanded ecosystem of stakeholders. So not just the developers and the designers, but understanding an ecosystem of the application. What is the social context? What's the historical context that we are applying the technology to? And in the archival space, in the computational archival space, some of that comes somewhat naturally in certain ways. So if you think of computational archival science in practice as the intersection of these three areas. Archival practices, with which you're primarily familiar. I think archival practices, and a workflow of data science, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the CAS framework, and computational thinking. So the intersection of those three things, our colleague Bill will talk a little bit more about computational thinking. If you think about it, our application domain are the archives, right? The tools and the way that we implement the tools are that data science flow, and the computational thinking helps us to organize our work, right? And so that's what our computational archival science is, with that overlay of the socio-technical as well. So today, as I go through our case studies, I'm going to focus on that socio-technical piece, but I'm also going to focus on ways that we apply the technologies, plural, at the access end of our framework, right? There are many other tasks to which we can apply computational methods in artificial intelligence, but I'm going to be focused mainly on that, on the end user, on the access by the end user, using some of those computational tools and those processes as well. And as I said previously, this particular set of case studies are using a set of collections from the Legacy of Slavery project at the Maryland State Archives. I'm going to start us out with a case study on some of the foundational computational treatment explorations that we did, segue into a more specialized exploration, and then move into specifically the AI space. When some of the things that we've started to do with the AI, and then finally started to do with the AI from a technical perspective, and then bringing in stakeholder participation in our most recently funded project. And so this is going to be a lightning talk for each one of those. You'll see that the slides are very, very full. And so the idea is that I'll whet your appetite. You can ask a few questions, but hopefully you'll go back to the slides for a little bit more detail, and we'll be able to follow up with us with some of the detail as well. So that first case study, this is this is where we started with the idea of looking at what are the opportunities for us to actually apply computational methods, data science, data analysis techniques to this kind of information and data. When I say this kind of information and data, we're talking about records that have been digitized that were originally in these types of manuscript forms, unstandardized, and put into databases, sometimes in systematic ways and sometimes not in systematic ways. So is it possible for us to apply computational treatments to those sorts of things and get some information out of it, get some kind of insight out of it? And the second part of our exploration with this research question too is, how does our knowledge, that socio-technical knowledge, the knowledge of the social systems, the cultural systems that were in play during the collection of the data, but also during the process of processing of the data, how does that inform the opportunities for using the computational treatments, but also present limitations to that as well? And so we've got, and I've done numerous presentations that go into the super duper details of this, but I'm just going to give you the highlights here. One of the things that I want to point out to you, because this is important, is that the two specific sets of documents that we used were something called manumissions documents. So manumissions documents were the variety of documents that were used to grant freedom to enslaved peoples. Okay, so these could be probate records, they could be in wills, there could be actual mandates. There are various forms that these could come in. And then there was, in Maryland, there was something called a certificate of freedom, because there were both free and enslaved populations of Black people in the antebellum times. And so if you were a Black person who was free, you would want to have your certificate of freedom to show that you were able to move freely about the society, right? And so that, think of that in terms of the pass system that there was in South Africa. Okay, so we had certificates of freedom and manumissions documents, and both of those documents have, even without being standardized, have certain characteristics and technique or characteristics related to them, which are understandable if we understand the historical context in which the documents were created. This represents a generic workflow that we applied in this situation. You'll notice in the beginning, there's a data engineering piece. So some of those documents were scanned and were transcribed. They were datafied, transcribed by volunteers to put into a database, right? All of that happened before we came along. So the area that's got the kind of the screen over it is what we did. So we took that datafied data, we cleaned it up, we transformed it somewhat, we applied various open source techniques. This was an exploration to see if if we were not the knowledgeable and dangerous developers like Greg, could we still apply techniques and get information out of this? So we used a lot of open source data cleaning, data analysis types of techniques, data visualization techniques to see if that was possible. Okay. So one of the things that one of the limitations that we came upon right away was recognizing that, gee, there were lots of differences between the information that ended up in these, basic SQL databases and what was in the original documents, right? Okay, so we had some of the basic challenges of there not being standard primary sources. Remember, I said manumissions papers and documents can show up in various forms. There were transcription errors. There were data entry errors that were there. And there were some assumptions that were made about how to create these data fields and what to actually what to actually mine from the documents to put into these data fields that left us questioning really what the information was, right? And so one of the things that we realized very quickly is that it was really important for us to understand not only the historical context of the documents, but also what were the decisions that were being made about how to format and capture this information in a datafied form. And so it quickly became apparent to us that understanding the data biography was a key consideration, right? So not just the provenance of the data, right? But understanding what some of the decisions were, what some of the contexts for decision-making were that led to at least this one datafied form of information. And so this is where our computational thinking came in. It invited us to consider what were or where were those key places that decisions may have been made about how to structure information, how to capture information, and how that was then available to us. And that also informed how we would choose to explore the data with computational methods. So not only the original documents, but the decisions in terms of the digitization became important in terms of informing what it was we could or could not discover from these documents. So we did do some analysis. I normally have a lot of really beautiful graphs and things like that. And so, come for another presentation. We'll do that then. But I just wanted to point out a few things here relative to this understanding what we're able to explore. As we ran some basic descriptive analytics, we found that our analysis actually allowed us to answer some questions or raise some questions about some of those decisions that have been made about digitization. So for instance, in the manumissions papers, there were dates related to when a manumission was effective, when an individual was freed. And those dates spanned the years of 1770 to 1870. Does anyone see anything wrong with that date that I have highlighted, 1870? I see some nodding of heads. Well, yeah, so we know that nationally, full emancipation occurred a little bit before 1870, and even those folks who got the news late in Texas on Juneteenth got it before 1870. Okay, so what was going on there? So that led us to inquire into the documents itself. And one of the things that we learned is that in Maryland, there was a practice called delayed manumission. So in your will, if you died in 1835, you might have a stipulation that that Bill would be freed upon his 40th birthday. Bill at that time might have been a child of age 5. And so you are delaying that manumission. It's recorded in your will, it's recorded in the courts, and that date, that future date, is then the date of the manumission. Okay. So that led us to look at what were these other discrepancies that might show up in the data, and how might we recode the data in order to reflect a reality of how the society was structured. Okay. Another example was with the certificates of freedom, where we saw that 93% of these certificates were granted to males. And so for a while, the conversation was, wow, only men received certificates of freedom. And then something told me to actually look at the data again. And so I looked at the data and I saw that the name Susan had a gender of male next to it. And I looked through, and what I saw is that the person who was transcribing the data just put male for a lot of the information, right? Mm-hmm. So once again, this was a signal to us to look at the datafication of the data and the original data in order to correct for and to get more information. One other thing that we saw as we visualized information is we began to see patterns on different things that we visualized. And so these are two different visualizations. The top is a visualization, I think, related to the number of, actually, they're both related to the number of manumissions, and they're both visualized in different ways. And we saw this weird spike on one and this weird drop off on the other, but very clearly there was something happening at that time. And so it led us to take a look at what was going on around 1831, 1832. And we found two drivers in the history of Maryland, one of them being the formation of the Maryland Colonization Society, which was actually a society formed by enslavers to send their enslaved folks back to back to Africa. And as you know, the colony of, or the country of Liberia was formed by repatriated enslaved folks. There is a Maryland, Liberia. So there was a lot of push to move enslaved folks back to Africa. And there was also the Nat Turner Revolt that happened in the state of Virginia, which led to a lot of clamping down on manumissions around that time. There was a lot of fear in the Delmarva area related to that. So it led us, what the patterns we're seeing led us to look at, once again, what were the dynamics in the society, what were the dynamics in history. Okay. So from this, there were several follow-ups that we thought might be very interesting. And I'm going to highlight two of those in the following case studies. Rather quickly, one is actually looking at more visualization with those data sets, and the other was taking a look at how might we use metadata to retrofit some of this information and to better apply computational treatments to them. So let's look at the first. This is, I call Historical Black Lives Matter. So this is a little exploration that I did, taking some of those basic visualizations and saying, gee, is there a way that if I were somebody coming into the archives, can I provide an interface for somebody to actually explore this data, visually, in the same way that I had played around with it with R code to do those nice little diagrams. Same source of the data. And so we had some challenges, right? Because most of this is text-based, it's not standardized information. And we wanted to be careful because we were representing human beings, but we want to be able to engage and communicate effectively with this. And so what I did was I put together I used a Tableau dashboard to put together these interfaces that allowed people to play with that same database, this time with the correction of the male-female names, right? And take a look at, on a county basis, look at age and sex, the number of manumissions, the certificates of freedom, evaluate trends across these things so that you could play around with the information and get a picture of what was going on. So another way to learn, but also to have interaction and insights with the data. And so some of the key takeaways with this, I was able to test this with a number of users, really engaging to have this kind of dynamic interaction and to be able to tell a story. Being able to position this information in a certain way aided with that engagement. I was able to play around with a variety of elements. And some of these other takeaways have to do with the design itself, but it was very much a successful trial of interacting, using that technology to interact with the data space. This third case study is a second way that we looked at interacting with the data. And this was actually led by our colleague, Rajesh, which was basically looking at, once we saw this ChatGPT capability, would it be possible for us to use ChatGPT to get some of the same analysis out of the set of data, to get similar analyses? Could we analyze some of that information that we used with Tableau using ChatGPT as well? And could we present that information in a way that would allow learning to others, to teach the ability to use chatbots as well as quote unquote traditional tools in order to do that analysis? And so this used a data set called the domestic traffic ads. So think of these as the as the want ads for you want to sell your Negro or you want to buy a Negro, and here's the information for you to do this. So this analysis was applied there, and Rajesh did a comparison of the techniques. There's some detail in terms of the technology involved, but one of the things that we found is that, as you would expect, especially for AI applications, remember before we talked about the standard computational treatments, we already needed to do some massaging of the data. Definitely, it was not particularly AI ready. For the AI treatments, significant pre-processing was needed. That need to understand the context, once again, reared itself. And there were certain controls that we needed to exercise in order to enable a certain level of trustworthiness. So on the basis of that, we have a current project, and I will just highlight some key things here. A current project that was just funded in July through the IMLS, where we're now taking some of the findings from all of those 3 case studies a step further, and we're involving stakeholder participation. Who are the people who would use the legacy of slavery collection, right? Teachers, historians, archivists, curious folks, people who have a higher level of education, or not so much level of education. How would those users engage with this? And how might we use generative AI to help with that engagement? Once again, this will be looking at the domestic traffic ads. And I just want to highlight here, because remember, I'm the socio-technical lady, right? I just want to highlight here our third research question, which incorporates that human-centered approach, where we want to involve the user communities and capture those expectations technically, if possible, but also use those expectations in terms of understanding and interpreting the information that we get, and understanding where human in the loop really is critical, both from the technical and the interpretation side of things. So there's a workflow that we have for that, which will involve developing some ontologies and some metadata, a back and forth of engaging the stakeholder groups to define possible metadata related not only to the records, but related to the context of user, and to test and refine that information to see whether we're actually able to automate some of that in the application of the technology. As Richard mentioned, the funding for that was just announced last month. We start in September, and we're really seeing this as an opportunity to strengthen the ability for libraries and archives to provide access and engagement to collections that are not normally accessible to others as well. And we expect there to be some challenges, of course, as always. So comments, discussion, questions? I have only probably about a minute left. Before we get to Bill, yes. Mm-hmm. No, my apologies. In the records, in the documents, yeah, there would be a document that said the manumission year is 1870, but people were obviously were manumitted no later than 1865. So our documents were telling us something different than reality. Yeah. Yes. So that is a broad question. It actually is the question that I deal with a lot because I deal with broader questions of AI bias, AI impact on society. The short answer is that that's something that I think we collectively need to work out, and that ideally, as with any technology development, AI is not, AI has a lot of hype related to it. But just as when we developed automobile technology, initially there weren't too many literal rules of the road. And some of the safety mechanisms that we need to build into automobiles were not there originally. The timeline has to be a little bit different for AI, and that we really need to do that now and not wait for that to develop over decades. But it's the same sort of thing that we need to be thinking about. What are the guidelines to protect people and planet according to the values that we hold as a society in terms of technology use and technology development? So, thank you.